From New York, this is Democracy Now!
You are ordered change your course to 360 degrees immediately. If you obey, you will be safe. Over.
Iran seizes a British oil tanker and its 23-person crew in the Strait of Hormuz amidst escalating tensions after Britain impounded an Iranian tanker earlier this month. Then protests in Hawaii head into a second week over the construction of a massive telescope on top of Mauna Kea, a volcano and sacred native site that's become a flashpoint of indigenous resistance.
So we're here to stop the desecration of our Mauna. Our life, actually. This is our land. This is where we live, and this is where we're going to die.
Last week, police arrested 33 people, most of them Hawaiian elders, as they blocked a road to the telescope being planned atop Mauna Kea. We'll get an update from indigenous activist Pua Case. Then, the Environmental Protection Agency will not ban the widely used pesticide chlorpyrifos, even though the agency's own research shows it can cause brain damage in children.
So there's a class of pesticides called organophosphates that are nerve agents. They were developed by the Nazis in World War II. Sarin gas is the most commonly known of this class of pesticides. After World War II, when the Nazi state was broken up, the chemical companies that emerged turned these nerve agents into pesticides.
We'll speak with Patty Goldman, managing attorney at Earth Justice, who represented health and labor advocates in a lawsuit against the EPA's 2017 decision not to ban chlorpyrifos. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Iran, authorities say they've arrested 17 Iranian citizens and charged them with being CIA-trained spies for the United States. Iranian media reports have said that some have already been executed. This comes as tensions in the Persian Gulf continued to mount over the weekend following Iran's seizure of a British oil tanker and its 23 crew members Friday. Iran said it seized the tanker in retaliation for the British impounding an Iranian tanker earlier this month off the coast of Gibraltar. The Iranian National Guard released video Sunday showing the vessel flying an Iranian flag. Britain says Iran forced the Stena Impero out of international waters and rerouted the tanker into Iranian territory. Audio released Sunday appears to show an Iranian official directing the vessel to change course.
You are ordered change your course to 360 degrees immediately. If you obey, you will be safe. Over.
Britain classified Iran's capture of the tanker as a hostile act. Today, Prime Minister Theresa May, who's expected to leave office Wednesday to be replaced by Boris Johnson, is holding emergency cabinet meetings. This comes as Iran continues to deny President Trump's claim that the U.S. military shot down an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif spoke out against the harsh U.S. sanctions while at a meeting of non-aligned movement in Caracas, Venezuela Sunday, calling them, quote, economic terrorism, pure and simple. Meanwhile, the Pentagon has said U.S. troops are being deployed to Saudi Arabia to defend American interests from, quote, emergent credible threats. The Saudi kingdom has not hosted U.S. combat forces since 2003, when Donald Rumsfeld announced their withdrawal. We'll have more on the latest in Iran after headlines. President Trump is continuing his attacks on 4 progressive congresswomen of color after tweeting last weekend that they should go back to the, quote, crime-infested places from which they came. They're all American citizens. Trump tweeted Sunday, I don't believe the 4 congresswomen are capable of loving our country. They should apologize to America and Israel for the horrible, hateful things they've said. They're destroying the Democrat Party, but are weak and insecure people who can never destroy our great nation, he said. On Friday, Trump said Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is, quote, lucky to be where she is. Trump also praised his supporters who chanted "Send her back" last week, referring to Omar, who is a political refugee from Somalia, calling them incredible patriots, despite disavowing the racist chants just a day earlier. On Saturday, Trump retweeted a right-wing British media personality who praised his attacks on the congresswoman and his crowd of supporters. Katie Hopkins tweeted, quote, new campaign slogan for 2020, don't love it, leave it. Send her back is the new lock her up. Well done to Team Trump, she tweeted. Hopkins has previously compared migrants to cockroaches and feral humans. At a town hall Saturday, New York Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fired back at Trump.
He's been thinking this the entire time, but he's been keeping it in here. And this week, it went out here when he started telling American citizens, where are we going to go? We're going to stay right here. That's where we're going to go. We're not going anywhere.
Heat wave that gripped much of central and eastern U.S. over the weekend is easing today. 157 million people were under heat warning Saturday as the heat index soared into the triple digits across the East Coast, reaching 110 degrees in Washington, D.C. Severe storms in the Midwest caused power outages for around 500,000 customers in Michigan. Last month was the hottest June ever recorded, and experts say July is on track to become the hottest month ever in recorded history. In the U.S., the number of days with a heat index of more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit will more than double by 2050 due to climate change, this according to the Union of Concerned Scientists. In Brooklyn, New York, where tens of thousands of people also experienced power outages this weekend, a fire broke out at the Metropolitan Detention Center Friday as the stifling heat swept over the city. The nonprofit Brooklyn Defender Services warned heat could make conditions at New York jails particularly unbearable and potentially dangerous, as most prisoners do not have access to air conditioning or even fans. In related news, the warden of the Metropolitan Detention Center, Herman Quay, was recently promoted 5 months after prisoners had to suffer freezing Arctic conditions at the jail without heating. Amidst massive ongoing protests in Puerto Rico, Governor Ricardo Rosselló announced Sunday he is resigning as head of the ruling New Progressive Party and that he would not seek re-election next year. He stopped short of resigning as governor, despite the demands of the protesters, who will take to the streets again today in what's expected to be the largest demonstration since a text message scandal rocked Puerto Rico a week and a half ago. A massive leak of text messages showed Governor Rosselló exchanging sexist, homophobic, and profane text messages with government officials, calling former New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito a whore, mocking victims of Hurricane Maria, and joking about shooting San Juan Mayor Carmen Yulín Cruz. This is a protester in San Juan Sunday.
His resignation is inevitable. The question is whether he's going to make us wait another week, another 2 weeks, or how many more weeks he's going to force us to continue on the streets. But there's no question of whether he's going to have to resign. He has to resign because Puerto Rico is hitting the streets, and Puerto Rico will continue to hit the streets. And once we get this governor out, we must continue to fight because we still have to deal with the Fiscal Control Board, the austerity policies, all the measures they want to impose on us to deal with this untenable debt. And we have to transfer this energy to the struggles.
Boris Johnson is expected to become the new British Prime Minister this week as Theresa May makes her exit Wednesday. The Conservative politician previously served as London Mayor and Foreign Secretary. President Trump has called Johnson a friend of mine who would make an excellent leader. In Hong Kong, police deployed tear gas and rubber bullets as protesters again took to the streets Sunday, calling for an investigation into police abuses against protesters and the withdrawal of the contested extradition bill, alongside other pro-democracy reforms. Late Sunday night, masked men stormed a subway station, attacking dozens of commuters, including many protesters returning home, as well as women and children. A reported 45 people were injured as the suspected gang members beat travelers with rods. Opposition leaders and organizers condemned Hong Kong police following the attack. One of the demonstration's organizers said, quote, "While the police were unnecessarily tear-gassing protesters, on the other side in Yuen Long, there were real thugs chasing and beating passers-by, journalists and lawmakers. This is outrageous," they said. In the occupied Palestinian territories, hundreds of Israeli troops have begun demolishing homes in the Wadi al-Hamas neighborhood of Surbar, a West Bank village located close to the separation barrier with Israel. Dozens of families could be pushed out of their homes. Residents say Israel wants to build more illegal settlements on the land and is destroying structures that were built with permits from the Palestinian Authority. Palestinians have been protesting against the planned demolitions for years. UN officials called on Israeli authorities to halt the move last week after the Israeli Supreme Court allowed the destruction to go ahead. Back in the United States, Democrats are preparing to question former special counsel Robert Mueller Wednesday in two House committee hearings. House Judiciary Chair Gerald Nadler spoke on Fox News Sunday.
I think there is very substantial, well, the report presents very substantial evidence that the president is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors, and we have to present, or let Mueller present those facts to the American people, and then see where we go from there, because the administration must be held accountable, and no president can be above the law.
3 white supremacists were sentenced to 2 to 3 years in prison Friday for committing violent acts, including kicking, choking, and punching people at the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, as well as other rallies in California. The U.S. attorney in the case said, quote, "They were not interested in peaceful protest or lawful First Amendment expression. Instead, they intended to provoke and engage in street battles with those that they perceived as their enemies." A fourth man is still due to be sentenced. The men belong to the white supremacist group Rise Above movement, which the attorney's office said has since been disbanded. The Los Angeles Times is reporting the Los Angeles Police Department sent a confidential informant to record meetings of the local chapter of Refuse Fascism, a political group that organized anti-Trump protests in 2017. The LAPD's spying on the group became public as several members of Refuse Fascism are being charged for blocking a section of an LA freeway during protests. The police reportedly determined the group posed no threat to the public, but civil rights groups say the LAPD may have overstepped in its surveillance. An attorney for the Southern California ACLU told the Times, quote, "When you know your investigation is going to infringe on core political rights that communities have, you have to be damn near certain that there is some criminal activity afoot." Independent Senator 2020 Democratic candidate Bernie Sanders unveiled his right to a secure retirement plan Friday. The plan includes expanding Social Security, protecting pensions, guaranteeing housing, food assistance and care for seniors, and providing fully covered health care through Medicare for All. Sanders introduced the plan as he and 16 other Democratic hopefuls participated in the AARP presidential forums in Iowa over the past week and weekend. And in Oklahoma, hundreds of immigrant rights and indigenous activists descended on Fort Sill Saturday, blocking the entrance to the site and shutting down freeway traffic for several hours. Activists are demanding the Trump administration and Oklahoma Republican Governor Kevin Stitt halt plans to jail migrant children at Fort Sill, which was used to incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II and has been called a concentration camp. Fort Sill was also once a prison for Native Americans. This is Daniela Melendez from United We Dream.
Fort Sill has a long history here in Oklahoma. It used to be a place where Native Americans were held into after the Trail of Tears, and also keeping them in as like prisoners basically, and also Japanese Americans have also had a long history here, as they were also in detention camps during World War II. And now we're seeing that Fort Sill is going to become a detention center for children of immigrants who are seeking asylum.
To see our coverage of protests at Fort Sill by Japanese American elders, go to democracynow.org. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Iran, where authorities say they've arrested 17 Iranian citizens and charged them with being CIA-trained spies for the United States. Iranian media reports some have already been executed. This comes as tensions in the Persian Gulf continue to mount over the weekend following Iran's seizure of a British oil tanker and its 23 crew members Friday in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran said it seized the tanker in retaliation for the British impounding an Iranian tanker earlier this month off the coast of Gibraltar. The Iranian National Guard released video Sunday showing the vessel flying now an Iranian flag. Britain says Iran forced the Stena Impero out of international waters and rerouted the tanker into Iranian territory. Audio released Sunday appears to show an Iranian official directing the vessel to change course.
Navy patrol boat. This is British warship Foxtrot. Charger port, Sail 3. Foxtrot 236. This is Sapar Navy patrol boat. No challenge is intended. No challenge is intended. I want to inspect the ship for security reason. Over.
Britain classified Iran's capture of the tanker as a hostile act. Today, Prime Minister Theresa May, who's expected to leave office Wednesday, is scheduled to hold a series of emergency cabinet meetings. Iran said it seized the tanker in retaliation for the British impounding of an Iranian tanker earlier this month off the coast of Gibraltar. This comes as Iran continues to deny President Trump's claim that the U.S. military shot down an Iranian drone in the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif accused the U.S. of engaging in economic terrorism with its sweeping sanctions that have devastated Iran since President Trump's 2018 decision to withdraw from the Iranian nuclear deal.
This is economic terrorism, pure and simple. We need to repeat it again and again. And we do not negotiate with terrorists. They do not negotiate with terrorists. We do not negotiate with terrorists because this is economic terrorism, what they're doing.
Amidst heightened tensions with Iran over the safety of shipping lanes in the Gulf, the Pentagon has said U.S. troops are being deployed to Saudi Arabia to defend American interests from so-called emergent credible threats. Saudi Arabia confirmed King Salman had approved the move. The kingdom has not hosted U.S. combat forces since 2003, when then Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld announced their withdrawal. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton's in Tokyo reportedly to meet with Japanese officials about a U.S.-led military coalition to safeguard shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. For more, we go to Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Narges Bajogli, professor of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University, author of the forthcoming book, Iran Reframed, Anxieties of Power in the Islamic Republic. She's also director of The Skin That Burns, a documentary film about survivors of chemical warfare in Iran. Professor Bajogli, welcome to Democracy Now! Can you talk about this latest series of actions in the Strait of Hormuz? The latest news we're getting just today that an unnamed Iranian official held a news conference saying they'd arrested 17 people somehow linked to the CIA and that some of them were executed. He would not identify himself. And then we have this seizing of the British tanker following the seizing of the Iranian tanker. Can you respond to all that's developing right now?
Sure. Well, you know, President Trump's maximum pressure campaign against Iran is really a multi-pronged campaign. So there is the issue of sanctions, which you had spoken about earlier in your segment, the economic sanctions that the Trump administration has put on Iran, especially on oil exports. That has been something that's gained a lot of media attention. Iran, for the first year after President Trump pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, sort of practiced a lot of restraint. In that first year, it tried not to retaliate in any way. However, as the oil sanctions increased in pressure and have resulted in the Iranian currency initially crashing quite a bit, what that's entailed has been that Iran has promised that it will retaliate in order to show that it's not going to stand by idly while maximum pressure is imposed on them. And so as things have heated up between the United States and Iran. Iran has attempted to react in different ways in order to sort of stand in front of different forms of American pressure, one being economic sanctions, the other being sort of ways that the Trump administration seems to be trying to corner Iran militarily. And so Iran is trying to raise the stakes not only for the United States, but for EU countries as well as other Persian Gulf countries, and saying that if there is further military confrontation in the region, it will be something that various countries will have to pay the cost of, not just the United States. So really, Iran is trying to sort of show that U.S. pressures are going to have repercussions for not just the Americans, but also for other countries involved.
What do you know of what's happened today with this arrest of Iranians that this unnamed official said were somehow linked to the CIA? Who knows if some were executed at this point?
Right. Well, you know, I'm reading the news as you all are as well. There has been a lot of in different instances in this past year, there have been points at which the Iranian government has said that they are accusing certain individuals or groups of individuals of working either with the Americans, the CIA, or with other intelligence agencies. You know, this is one of those instances, and this is why so many activists in Iran, civil rights activists who are involved in civil society in Iran, have been so much against the sanctions and against this sort of pressure from the United States, because what this means is it further securitizes all of civic society within Iran. So this is sort of whether or not these individuals that they are claiming have ties to the CIA. The fact is, in this sort of environment, when there is this sort of maximum pressure from the United States, what ends up happening is that it becomes easy for the government within Iran to securitize the atmosphere and say that, you know, different people are involved in activities with the United States. Some may be, we don't know, but it's also a net that they can sort of cast widely, and that's why a lot of lawyers, activists, and rights workers in Iran have been very much against this sort of pressure from the United States, because it actually ends up working against those within Iran.
There's an interesting piece in The Guardian that's headlined "How Trump's Arch Hawk Lured Britain into a Dangerous Trap to Punish Iran." And it says, when he's talking about the National Security Advisor, John Bolton, heard British Royal Marines had seized an Iranian oil tanker off Gibraltar on America's Independence Day, his joy was unconfined. He tweeted, "Excellent news. UK has detained the supertanker Grace 1 laden with Iranian oil bound for Syria in violation of EU sanctions." It goes on to say Bolton's delighted reaction suggested the seizure was a surprise, but accumulating evidence suggests the opposite is true, and that Bolton's national security team was directly involved in manufacturing the Gibraltar incident. The suspicion is that conservative politicians, distracted by picking a new prime minister in Britain, jockeying for power, and preoccupied with Brexit, stumbled into an American trap. Talk about this. Very significant. What I guess Boris Johnson is expected to be the new prime minister of Britain, perhaps tomorrow, with Theresa May leaving on Wednesday. But what this means, bringing Britain in. I mean, what's very interesting in all of this, which is probably not lost on many Iranians, is you go back to 1953, not a significant year for many Americans, but all Iranians, whether they were born then or not, know that that was the year that the U.S. CIA was involved with overthrowing the democratically elected president of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh, on behalf of what is now British Petroleum, right, Anglo-American oil. What about this U.S.-UK alliance here?
Right. So in 1953, as you mentioned, it was the UK actually who was trying to bring the United States into what ended up becoming a U.S. and UK-led coup against the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, because he had nationalized Iranian oil and kicked out the British who were controlling the Iranian oil fields. So that incident ended up having large consequences in Iranian political history. Many historians point to the fact that that might have been even one of the reasons that later on the 1979 revolution came about, because the Shah was reinstated after that coup, and he was extremely unpopular in Iran in the years after the 1953 coup. In this instance, that the Guardian article that you're referring to, it's very interesting. Well, one of the reasons that this is very significant is that John Bolton was involved in the lead up to the war with Iraq in 2002. In that war, the United States really relied heavily on the UK, on Tony Blair, in coming behind it and helping to lead that war into Iraq. And also, the United States really needed its coalition in Europe in order to do so. In this instance, the Trump administration doesn't have the support of the Europeans, including the United Kingdom, once it pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in May of 2018. That was a deal that all of these, the United States, Europe, Russia, and China had worked for years to build that deal and to come to terms with the Iranians on the nuclear issue. When the Trump administration decided to unilaterally pull out, the Europeans have tried, at least in word, to say that they continue to be committed to this deal and have tried to figure out ways to work around the sanctions that the United States has unilaterally imposed on Iran. And so as this maximum pressure campaign has ramped up, the Trump administration has tried to bring in allies in the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel, in confronting Iran for various reasons. Some of those, including the Emirates specifically, have begun to, it seems at least, pull away from the U.S. in trying to support some sort of military or some sort of campaign against Iran. Now, in this instance, with the reporting that The Guardian has put out today, what it's showing is that John Bolton is trying to get the UK involved in confronting Iran. And if the United States can build some sort of coalition at least, and it seems like John Bolton out of the Trump administration really is at least the one strand that we can point to that wants some sort of military confrontation with Iran, that at the end of the day he wants some sort of regime change. And so if he can, if this reporting is true from The Guardian, and he's really been able to set out this trap to bring the United Kingdom into this confrontation, that's very significant. And none of this should be lost on, we need to be able to connect these dots to who John Bolton was during the George W. Bush administration and his role in the Iraq War.
So the significance right now, I mean, you have the two oil tankers, one held by Britain, one held by Iran right now. You have the U.S., Trump announcing they'd shot down an Iranian drone, and Iran saying they haven't. You have the U.S. sending troops to Saudi Arabia. How serious is this right now? And Professor Bajogli, you have done a lot of research over many years around the Revolutionary Guard. There are also divisions within Iran right now. And the question is, who is being empowered by this conflict that started with Trump pulling out of the Iran nuclear agreement that led to these intense sanctions that's putting intense pressure on the population?
Yeah, so, for many years, voters in Iran kept voting for reformists and moderates in the hopes that they would engage with the West and with the United States in particular in order to bring Iran out of this isolation that it's been in since the 1979 revolution, in which, Iran is a country that's been sanctioned by the United States for about 40 years now. And so the idea with the Iran deal was to begin these sorts of conversations and to at least allow certain avenues of trade between Iran and Western powers. The point that is happening today is that the moderates and the reformists kept pushing for let's engage with the United States, let's engage with the West. With Trump pulling out and imposing all of this pressure on Iran, right now, what has happened is that it's the hardliners within the Islamic Republic and especially within the Revolutionary Guard who are gaining the upper hand here. And in the face of, again, as I mentioned, maximum pressure from the Trump administration is multi-pronged. So there are covert actions happening. There are the economic sanctions. There are very large media and social media campaigns being targeted at Iranians within the country. So in this sort of atmosphere, what's happening is that the hardliners in Iran have been vindicated by saying, see, we told you could never trust the United States. We shouldn't have gone down this path anyways. And so in this instance right now, for the moment at least, we've seen a united front on the Iranian leadership in standing up to what it sees as a war by the United States in multiple ways. It just hasn't gotten to a hot war quite yet. But there is the sanctions, the media wars, all of these things are happening in tandem. And so this is a situation in which the Iranian leadership is rallying around the flag, and they're trying to get the Iranian public to rally around it as well. And that will only benefit the hardliners within Iran.
Can you talk, Professor Bajogli, about the social media campaign that the U.S. has launched as part of its, quote, maximum pressure strategy?
Yes, well, this is multi-pronged as well. So one of the things that we know that journalists have been reporting on within the past month and a half is the U.S. State Department has been funding social media campaigns that have been targeting American journalists, scholars, for those who are against the Trump administration's Iran policies. Those have been smear campaigns, trolling campaigns. There have been letters sent to employers of these journalists and editors and scholars. And then within Iran, there's been a lot of money given by the U.S. State Department as well as other entities to promote either troll farms, to promote specifically satellite Iranian, so Persian language Iranian satellite stations that are broadcast to Iran. If you begin to trace the differences in the guests that they've been inviting within the past year, the kind of analysis that is being provided by some of these different stations like Voice of America. There's a Saudi-funded Iran International. All of these different satellite stations are embroiled in this wider maximum pressure campaign, which is geared towards creating as much economic pressure on Iran through the sanctions, and then really sowing feelings of discord and despair within the population. That it's one of the hopes of John Bolton, and he's mentioned this publicly many times, that maximum pressure will will lead to a situation in which Iranians within Iran will rise up and ask for regime change themselves. And so the economic sanctions are one part of it, and that's sort of the more visible part that we're seeing, but there's an entire media campaign that's going on around this as well that's meant to both suppress dissent in the United States against what the Trump administration is doing, as well as create discord within Iran through these different media campaigns. Professor
Bajogli, in the last 30 seconds we have, what do you think needs to happen right now to avoid a war?
Well, the Iran has said, and it stands by, and its actions show that whatever actions the United States or European powers take militarily within Iran, Iran will retaliate. And so what needs to happen at this stage is there are talks between Iran and the United States going on now, as Zarif's Foreign Minister Zarif's trip here last week in New York indicated. And so those conversations really need to continue, and all sides need to begin to de-escalate, because whatever actions either the United States or any other powers take in the Persian Gulf region, Iran will retaliate, and eventually these tits for tats will lead to, I think, very devastating military confrontation in the Middle East that it seems that no one really wants at this time.
Nargis Bajogli, we want to thank you for being with us, Professor of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University. Her book, Iran Reframed: Anxieties of Power in the Islamic Republic, is due out in September. She's also director of The Skin That Burns, a documentary film about survivors of chemical warfare in Iran. When we come back, we go to Hawaii to look at the growing resistance against the construction of a massive telescope on top of Mauna Kea, a sacred native site in Hawaii. We'll go to that site. Stay with us.
No ane I Coca-Cola, no ane I Coca-Cola ea, he na kupuna. A ohe mea nanai ho'oni, a ohe mea nanai kulai ea, he na makua. Coca-Cola, no ane I Coca-Cola ea, he na kupuna. A ohe mea nanai ho'oni, a ohe mea nanai kulai ea.
The Filipino-Hawaiian musician Kalani Pea, who's been at the protests that we'll be talking about now. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman as we go to Hawaii's Big Island, where growing protests are heading into a second week against the construction of a massive telescope on top of Mauna Kea, a dormant volcano, sacred native site that's become a flashpoint of indigenous resistance. On Sunday, demonstrators reported more than 2,000 people had gathered at an access road to stop construction on Hawaii's highest peak from starting. Last week, police arrested 33 people, most of them Hawaiian elders, as they blocked a road to prevent work crews from reaching the site of the 30-meter telescope being planned atop Mauna Kea.
We have a right to worship God in the environment of our belief. Respect it.
Just hours after the arrests, Hawaii's Democratic Governor, David Ige, signed an emergency order granting police more power to clear the way for construction equipment.
This afternoon, I signed an emergency proclamation for the situation on Mauna Kea. Since Monday, protesters have illegally occupied roads and highways. We do believe that this emergency proclamation gives law enforcement the additional tools that they need to continue to work to keep the people safe.
Activists say construction of the telescope was approved without consulting the local Native community. The protests build on decades of indigenous resistance in Hawaii. This week, the Hawaii County Council plans to vote on a resolution, quote, strongly urging Governor Ige and Mayor Harry Kim to honor a request for a 60-day moratorium on the construction. For more, we go to Hawaii's Big Island, where we're joined by Pua Case, an indigenous organizer, one of the leading activists defending Hawaii's Mauna Kea. Welcome to Democracy Now! It's great to have you with us, Pua. If you can describe for us where you are and just tell us what is happening, who is building or attempting to build this telescope, and why are the indigenous people of Hawaii so concerned?
Aloha mai kākou o Pua Case ko uinoa o Mauna a Wakea ku Mauna. Aloha everyone, my name is Pua Case. Mauna Kea is my mountain. I'm reporting from a hunter's check-in station at a place called Pu'uhuluhulu, which is right across the street of the access road leading up to Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea is a sacred mountain for us here in Hawaii. Mauna Kea is genealogically linked to the native people of these lands. Mauna Kea is known as our kupuna, our ancestor, our teacher, our protector, our corrector, and our guide. And so for the last 10 years, we have held off the project of the building of an 18-story telescope on the top of our mountain near the summit on a pristine area called the Northern Plateau over our water aquifer and the source of water for much of this island. Those who are partnering in this project are Canada, China, India, Japan, and the United States in the area of California, with the largest single donor being the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation in Palo Alto. So why we are standing for this mountain is quite simple, Amy, and thank you for having me on the show. If I could put it very simply, I would say, if we don't stand for the most sacred, what will we stand for? And if not now, when will we stand? So we are making a stand as not just Native people and not just the local community, but really a worldwide community, because there are so many similarities. There are Native people everywhere around the world standing for their mountaintops, for their waters, for their land bases, their oceans, and their lifeways. We are no different than them. But because Mauna Kea is the highest mountain in the world from the seafloor, and spiritually speaking, there are reasons that Mauna Kea is connected to many different mountains around the world. And the integrity and the essence of water in our spirituality is why we must not allow 18 stories to be built on the northern plateau of our mountain. It is the one too many and the one too big. And we have said no for the last 10 years and have been successful so far in stopping the project.
Now, the foundation gave money to Caltech, is that right, Pua? And
yes, it is.
And who was consulted? Why do they have rights to this mountain? There are other telescopes there, is that right?
Yes, there are other telescopes on the summit of the mountain. The University of Hawaii has the lease on the summit of the mountain until 2033. So from the late 1960s, there have been smaller telescopes built on the mountain. And you know, Amy, you have to understand, and I'm explaining to the world community right now, it would take a whole semester course to try to explain why 13 telescopes are now sitting at the top of the mountain. What I can say is that for many of our people, my grandparents' generation, and my parents as well, you know, there comes in that time period, you don't even know if you have the ability to stop something like that. We were in a time period where people would say, oh, they're just going to build it anyway. And a lot of times we were not even aware that building was occurring on the summit. And so for a lot of different reasons, 13 telescopes sit on the summit of Mauna Kea. The 18-story, 30-meter telescope cannot possibly fit on the mountain. The desecration, the construction, and the destruction of the northern plateau is just something that cannot be allowed on our sacred mountain. As I said before, it's the one too many and the one too big. So what I will say is the University of Hawaii initiated the permit on behalf, the permit application on behalf of the countries, because most of the countries are already up on the mountain in those 13 other telescopes. Only China and India are not on the mountain at this time.
We heard that the National Guard might be called in. You have the Hawaii Governor, David Ige, issuing an emergency order granting police more power to clear the way for construction equipment. He says that the protesters are dangerous. Can you talk about what you expect to happen today? First, I want to go to an activist speaking last week during a news conference.
Sure. And I reaffirm to each and every Makai, each and every police officer, each and every individual who's going to come and attempt to get us out of the way. We will stand, and we will stand in kapu aloha. We are committed, we are absolutely committed to peace, peaceful protest, non-violent action. We are not wavering from that. And so to the Makai, I ask you folks to make that same commitment, because you guys are not my enemy. None of you are my enemy. Our enemy is this illegal occupying state that continues to deny the rights of Kanaka, who continue to treat us as a non-existent, dead people. Ekalahui, are we dead? Are we dead? We're alive.
That an activist at a news conference last week. So talk about the governor's charges and also where the Honolulu mayor stands.
That young activist is one of our organizers. That's Kaho'okahi Kanuha. And his words exemplify the stance that we were taking on the day that the law enforcement came in to the access road area. And what I want to preface this with is, who would ever think, and that's what I spoke to the Makai, or the law enforcement, about as they stood there, some of them in full riot gear with their batons. Many of them either are relatives or Native Hawaiians who are put in a very difficult position to have to stand there and possibly arrest us, and certainly the possibility of harm. So what I said to them that day was, who would ever think that in Hawaii, I, as a middle school teacher, and just the daughter of ranchers that come from this area, and many of us, we are mothers and fathers. We are aunties and uncles. We are elders, and we are youth. And being so passionate about what is left of our culture, our sacred places, and our life ways, that we would find ourselves standing in the middle of the street, facing armed officers with only our kapu aloha, or the manner in which we stand, our code of conduct, integrity, standing in the way that our ancestors would expect and command of us, in nonviolence, no resistance, facing our relatives. And so that in itself is very difficult. So Governor Ige, Oahu governor, did issue a state of emergency at the end of that day, after 33 of our elders were arrested because they had made a stand, and they are still sitting in those chairs till today, make a stand to block that access road, because that is the only way that the machinery will be able to go up the mountain. So what I want to
Pua, I wanted to read from the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, the local paper.
Sure.
It says the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation in 2007 committed $200 million to the California Institute of Technology and the University of California toward TMT's construction. Gordon Moore is the leader of the semiconductor industry, co-founder of Intel Corporation, creator of the world's first microprocessor. You have what happened yesterday at Standing Rock. The Standing Rock Sioux tribal members gathering at the epicenter of the Dakota Access Pipeline to show solidarity with you, with Native Hawaiians who are opposing the construction of this huge telescope at Mauna Kea. Can you compare what's happening right now to what took place in Standing Rock? Do you see similarities?
You know, I certainly can, because I was at Standing Rock twice, and so were a large number of our people here. When Standing Rock occurred, we already had a relationship with the leadership of both Sacred Stone Camp and Standing Rock. And in fact, the first day when we took that stance, when the elders sat there and chose to block the road, the first caller that we had that morning to bless our day was LaDonna Brave Bull Allard. So we have a very close relationship to our relatives, because we are both standing for what is sacred: water. We are standing for the water from our mountain, and they, of course, are standing for their water. The similarities are astounding, some of them being you have a small space with a large amount of people that cannot help themselves but be there. Because for those of us who are either struggling, who have lost so much, when we see the opportunity to assist and support relatives who are going through the same thing, we will do everything in our power to either be there or assist in some way from afar. So many of our relatives from Standing Rock have pledged to be here if we put the call out. So the camaraderie, the alliances, the networking, and the relationships that you create when you stand on each other's front lines is something that is binding. We make a commitment to each other. Right now, we have not put out that call because we went from 30 people when we started last Friday. We are up to about 3,000 people. So at this point, we have not put a call out to anyone anywhere other than Hawaii. However, we are finding each day that relatives from all around the world are finding their way here, even though that call out has not been made.
And do you expect the National Guard to come out today?
The National Guard is here, yes. When Governor Ige did issue the state of emergency that allowed for the deployment of the National Guard, we know that they have been flying in. We know that they're housed very close to where we are because the Pohakuloa military base is just miles down the road. I can't tell you what will happen today, to be quite honest. It changes every second of the day. I'm not sure we are aware of what is going to happen. We just remain on alert, we remain vigilant 24 hours. We are actually located in a parking lot, which has become a sanctioned sanctuary and safe place for us, and along the sides of a road in lava fields. So that's where we differ from Standing Rock. We don't have the kind of infrastructure here to create a large camp, except to be right in the elements, in the lava, and in the parking lot across from the access road. We know that the National Guard is here. We know that a large amount of law enforcement is here as well. And again, I have to emphasize that we are people, just people. We are not trained We are not armed. We come from all walks of life. We are Native people. We are local residents. We are visitors, but we have made a commitment. So what I would like to share, just as an example of how it is here.
We just have 30 seconds, Pua.
Oh, I'm sorry. So so what I would like to say in ending, if we have 30 seconds left, is I want to thank the worldwide community for standing with us. And so what we are asking is that you go to Actions for Mauna Kea Facebook page. You can find all the information about us. Thank you to everyone around the world, and to you, Amy, for allowing us to voice what is happening here in Hawaii. We are proud people. We are standing for what we have left. And
Pua, I want to say thank you for joining us. I'd like to ask you to stay to the top of the hour to do part 2 of this interview, where you can explain further why you are taking this stand. I want to thank you, Pua Case, Indigenous organizer defending Hawaii's Mauna Kea. She is there at the access road with so many others who are trying to prevent the 30-meter telescope, or TMT, from being built at the summit of Mauna Kea, the largest mountain in the world, a volcano. Thank you so much for being with us from Hawaii. When we come back, the Environmental Protection Agency says it will not ban a widely used pesticide, even though the agency's own research shows it can cause brain damage in children. We'll be back in 30 seconds.
Hawaii, stand together, is now. The glories of our land.
Protesters singing at Mauna Kea in Hawaii. Special thanks to Mikey Inoue. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we end today's show with news that the Environmental Protection Agency says it will now not ban the widely used pesticide chlorpyrifos, even though the agency's own research shows it can cause cancer, it can cause brain damage in children. The substance is sold under the commercial name Lorsban and is banned for household use, but it's still used by farmers on more than 50 fruit, nut, cereal, and vegetable crops. The announcement Thursday came after the Obama administration said it would ban the use of the toxic chemical in 2015, but the rule never took effect and was suspended in 2017 by then EPA head Scott Pruitt, who was forced out of his position because of corruption. For more, we're joined now in Seattle, Washington, by Patty Goldman, managing attorney at Earth Justice, who represented health and labor advocates in the lawsuit against the EPA's original decision in 2017. It's great to have you back with us. Can you explain, Patty Goldman, what chlorpyrifos is, why you think it's such a danger?
Chlorpyrifos is a pesticide that was developed first by the Nazis as a nerve agent, and then after World War II, this pesticide was turned into a pesticide. Sarin gas is in this family. It causes acute poisoning for people if they come into contact with it. And what we've learned over the last 15+ years is it also causes learning disabilities at children at even lower doses. So we're talking about reduced IQ, autism, attention deficit disorder, every parent's fears. And it causes that harm at extremely low doses. So scientists have found this in numerous studies, including Columbia University, Mount Sinai School of Medicine, Berkeley. And EPA has found, based on all of those studies and animal studies, that this pesticide causes brain damage to children, permanent brain damage. But it refuses to ban the pesticide. Instead, it wants to put it off and keep this pesticide on the market, on our food, in children's bodies until 2022, an artificial deadline for it to adjust all of the older pesticides.
We actually, at this point, only have a minute. Talk about what you're demanding right now, why Earth Justice has gotten so involved with this.
Well, we've gotten involved because often EPA is under pressure from the regulated industry not to do its job. And we represent the voices that need to be heard, the public that will pressure the agency to do its job, health organizations, labor, farm workers, food advocates. And we live in a country under the rule of law where we can go to court and hold the EPA to the law, and the law which requires it to find a pesticide safe before it can be allowed on our food. EPA has not made that finding and cannot make that finding for this pesticide. The only legal action is for EPA to ban it, and that's what we are going to make happen through the courts. It will happen. It's just a question of how long it will take and how many children will suffer, how many families will suffer from learning disabilities and acute poisonings in the meantime.
Patty Goldman, I want you to stay with us so we can do part 2 to explain the history of this chemical pesticide. Patty Goldman, managing editor at Earth Justice. That does it for our broadcast. I'm Amy Goodman. Our website, democracynow.org. Thanks so much for joining us.